The grand doors of the crystal ballroom shimmered under the soft glow of a dozen chandeliers. Tonight was the night of the annual charity gala, a spectacle of wealth and generosity. Limousines lined the streets, dropping off elegantly dressed guests. Jewels sparkled, gowns flowed, and the air buzzed with anticipation. Against this backdrop of polished perfection, a figure emerged who seemed entirely out of place. His name was Arthur, and he was, to put it kindly, a bit rumpled. His suit, though clearly once expensive, looked like it had seen better days. A tie hung loosely around his neck, slightly askew. His shoes, while leather, were scuffed and bore the marks of countless walks. Arthur wasn't exactly disheveled, but he certainly didn't radiate the aura of affluence that permeated the gala's entrance. He approached the security checkpoint with a hesitant step. He adjusted his glasses, which were slightly crooked on his nose, and offered a small, polite smile to the imposing figures guarding the entrance. He looked toward the ballroom, trying to catch a glimpse of the beautifully decorated interior. He felt a knot of nervousness in his stomach. He wasn't used to such fancy events, but he knew he needed to be here. Tonight was important. He just hoped he could get past the guards. Beyond the security checkpoint lay a world of dazzling extravagance. The crystal ballroom lived up to its name. Massive crystal chandeliers, each sparkling with hundreds of tiny lights, illuminated the scene below. Tables draped in shimmering gold cloths were laden with delicacies. Towers of shrimp, glistening pastries, and bottles of champagne chilling in silver buckets. The air hummed with polite conversation and the soft strains of a live orchestra. Women in elegant, floor-length gowns mingled with men in impeccably tailored suits. Diamond necklaces glittered, and expensive watches flashed under the lights. Every detail, from the floral arrangements to the place settings, spoke of wealth and meticulous planning. This wasn't just a party, it was a gathering of the city's elite. Politicians, CEOs, and philanthropists filled the room, each one a pillar of the community. Deals were made with handshakes, and fortunes were discussed over canapes. To be invited to this gala was a sign of status, a confirmation of belonging to the upper echelons of society. The weight of their collective influence hung heavy in the air, a palpable sense of power and importance. It was a world far removed from Arthur's own, a world where appearances mattered as much as actions. He could feel the scrutiny, the unspoken judgment, as he stood just outside its glittering threshold. Arthur stepped forward, his smile faltering slightly under the stern gaze of Bruno, the head of security. Bruno was a mountain of a man, his broad shoulders straining against his perfectly pressed uniform. His expression was unreadable, his eyes narrowed with professional suspicion. "Invitation, sir?" Bruno's voice was deep and resonant, like a distant rumble of thunder. Arthur fumbled in his pockets, a look of dawning realization spreading across his face. "Oh dear," he muttered. "I seem to have misplaced it." He patted his coat pockets, then his trouser pockets, with increasing desperation. "I'm terribly sorry. I'm sure I had it just a moment ago." Bruno raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Name?" "Arthur Penhaligon," he replied, a little too quickly. Bruno turned to his colleague, a younger, equally imposing guard, who was diligently scrolling through a tablet. The guard shook his head. "Not on the list, Bruno." Arthur's heart sank. He knew this was going to be difficult. "There must be some mistake," he pleaded. "Mr. Davenport is expecting me. I assure you, I'm supposed to be here." Bruno remained unmoved. "No invitation, not on the list. I can't let you in, sir." His voice left no room for argument. The glittering world of the gala seemed even further away now, a distant dream slipping through Arthur's fingers. "But truly," Arthur insisted, his voice rising slightly in desperation, "Mr. Davenport specifically asked me to be here. We spoke just this morning. It's about the funding." He trailed off, realizing he was perhaps saying too much. He hadn't wanted to reveal his involvement. Bruno's expression remained unchanged, a mask of professional skepticism. "Funding, sir? I'm sure Mr. Davenport has many generous donors. Without an invitation or your name on the list, I have no way of verifying your claim." He gestured towards the line of impeccably dressed guests flowing smoothly into the ballroom. "We can't hold up the line for this." Arthur wrung his hands, feeling increasingly flustered. "Could you perhaps call Mr. Davenport? Just a quick phone call. He'll confirm it. It would only take a moment." He knew he sounded increasingly frantic, but he couldn't think of anything else to do. He had to get inside. Bruno sighed, a hint of impatience flickering across his features. "Sir, I have strict instructions. Mr. Davenport is a very busy man tonight. I can't simply disturb him based on your say-so." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." The younger guard stepped forward, ready to assist Bruno. Arthur knew he was fighting a losing battle. Bruno clearly wasn't going to budge. "I really must protest," Arthur began, but his words were cut short. Bruno, with surprising speed for such a large man, took Arthur firmly by the arm. The younger guard mirrored his action, gripping Arthur's other arm. "Come along, sir," Bruno said, his voice now devoid of any politeness. "You're creating a scene." Arthur struggled, but it was no use. The two guards were too strong. He tried to dig his heels in, but they simply lifted him slightly off the ground, propelling him forward. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed, his voice strained. "I have every right to be here." He caught glimpses of shocked and amused faces as he was unceremoniously marched through the entrance hall. The elegant guests parted like the Red Sea, their whispers following him like a mocking chorus. He could feel the heat rising in his cheeks, the humiliation burning deep within him. The guards didn't stop until they reached the heavy oak doors that led to the street. With a final shove, Arthur was thrust out onto the sidewalk, the doors closing firmly behind him. He stumbled, nearly falling, and landed awkwardly on the pavement. The sounds of music and laughter faded slightly, replaced by the cold night air and the distant rumble of city traffic. He was out, completely and utterly out, and utterly humiliated. Arthur stood on the sidewalk, brushing dust off his suit, a wave of humiliation washing over him. He couldn't believe what had just happened. Dragged out like some common troublemaker. He glanced back at the imposing building, the sounds of merriment now a distant taunt. How could this have gone so wrong? Frustration simmered within him. He had specifically cleared his schedule for this event. He had even, against his better judgment, put on the blasted suit. And for what? To be unceremoniously ejected onto the street. He replayed the scene in his head, searching for some explanation. Had he said something wrong? Had he not been clear enough about his connection to Mr. Davenport? Or was it simply that he didn't look the part? He knew he wasn't one for fancy clothes and social gatherings, but he hadn't expected to be treated like this. He felt a surge of anger towards Bruno, the unyielding security guard. Couldn't he have shown a little discretion? A little common sense? A simple phone call would have cleared everything up. Now he was standing on the sidewalk, feeling utterly foolish and rejected. He sighed, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. What was he going to do now? Go home? Pretend none of this had happened? The thought was tempting, but he knew he couldn't. He had made a commitment, and he wasn't one to back down, even when faced with such blatant disrespect. Inside the crystal ballroom, oblivious to Arthur's predicament, Mr. Davenport, the Gala's esteemed host, was preparing to take the stage. A natural showman, Mr. Davenport possessed an easy charm and a genuine warmth that made him beloved by all who knew him. He was a master of ceremonies, able to command attention and inspire generosity with a single word. He adjusted his perfectly knotted bow tie and smoothed down his impeccably tailored tuxedo. He surveyed the room, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction. The gala was a resounding success. The atmosphere was electric, the donations were pouring in, and the charity he championed was poised to make a real difference in the lives of countless people. Tonight, however, was more than just a fundraising event. Mr. Davenport had a special announcement to make, one that he had been eagerly anticipating. He glanced at a small card in his hand, containing a few carefully chosen words. He wanted to express his gratitude to the individual whose extraordinary generosity had made everything possible. It was time to acknowledge the silent partner, the unsung hero, the man who preferred to remain in the shadows. He took a deep breath, a smile playing on his lips, and signaled to the orchestra to prepare for his introduction. The moment was at hand. Just as Mr. Davenport was about to step onto the stage, a ripple of unease spread through the crowd near the entrance. He noticed a few guests whispering and pointing towards the doors. His brow furrowed with concern. He prided himself on running a smooth and seamless event, and any disruption was unwelcome. He discreetly beckoned to Mrs. Abernathy, a well-connected socialite known for her sharp wit and even sharper observations. "Agatha, my dear," he said, his voice low and smooth. "What seems to be the commotion by the entrance?" Mrs. Abernathy leaned in conspiratorially, her eyes gleaming with gossip. Apparently, security just ejected a rather unconventional gentleman. Claimed he was a guest, but didn't have an invitation. Caused quite a stir, I must say. Mr. Davenport's eyes widened slightly. An unconventional gentleman claiming to be a guest? A sudden, unsettling thought flickered through his mind. Could it be? He dismissed it as quickly as it came. Surely, it couldn't be Arthur. Arthur was always so unassuming. But still, a seed of doubt had been planted. He excused himself politely from Mrs. Abernathy and headed towards the entrance, a growing sense of unease gnawing at him. He needed to find out what had happened. As Mr. Davenport approached Bruno, he saw the security guard looking flustered. He overheard Bruno telling another guard, "I followed protocol, I swear. No invitation, not on the list." That was all Mr. Davenport needed to hear. A cold dread washed over him. Protocol. He knew Arthur. Arthur wouldn't bother with invitations or lists. He probably didn't even own a proper tuxedo. He acted quickly. Without a word to Bruno, Mr. Davenport strode purposefully towards the stage. He grabbed the microphone from the bandleader, who looked startled by the sudden intrusion. The music faltered and died, leaving an abrupt silence in its wake. All eyes turned towards Mr. Davenport. A mixture of curiosity and concern etched on their faces. He took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to rectify this situation immediately. He couldn't believe he had almost made such a terrible mistake. Arthur deserved so much better. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming through the ballroom, "I must apologize for this interruption, but there seems to have been a slight misunderstanding." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the room. "A rather important guest has been temporarily detained, and I need him back. Now." The silence in the ballroom was thick enough to cut with a knife. Every eye was glued to Mr. Davenport, waiting for him to elaborate. He cleared his throat and continued, his voice now laced with a touch of urgency. "Bruno," he said, his gaze fixed on the bewildered security guard near the entrance, "I believe you may have made a slight error in judgment. The gentleman you just removed from the premises? He is, in fact, an honored guest. A very honored guest." He paused for emphasis, allowing his words to sink in. "I need him brought back inside. Immediately. Please escort him back in with the utmost courtesy and respect." "Understood." Bruno, his face paling visibly, stammered, But, sir, he didn't have an invitation, and his name wasn't on the list." Mr. Davenport cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Protocol is important, Bruno, but judgment is even more so. Now, please, rectify the situation. Immediately." He gave Bruno a look that brooked no argument. The message was clear. Fix this, and fix it now. The fate of Bruno's job, and perhaps his reputation, hung in the balance. The crowd murmured amongst themselves, a buzz of speculation filling the ballroom. Who was this mysterious, honored guest who had been so unceremoniously ejected? Bruno, his face a mask of mortification, swallowed hard. He glanced at his colleague, who avoided his gaze. The weight of hundreds of curious eyes pressed down on him. He had no choice. He had to obey Mr. Davenport's order, no matter how absurd it seemed. With a sigh of resignation, he turned and strode towards the heavy oak doors, his steps heavy and reluctant. He pushed them open and stepped out onto the sidewalk, the cold night air hitting him like a slap in the face. He spotted Arthur standing a short distance away, looking lost and bewildered. Bruno approached him cautiously, his usual stern demeanor replaced with an awkward, almost apologetic expression. "Mr. Penhaligon," he asked, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. Arthur looked up, surprised to see Bruno. "Yes. Mr. Davenport has requested that you return to the gala," Bruno mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding." He offered a stiff, almost robotic bow. "Please, allow me to escort you back inside." Arthur stared at Bruno, a mixture of disbelief and amusement flickering in his eyes. He couldn't quite believe what was happening. After being so unceremoniously ejected, he was now being invited back in by the very man who had thrown him out. The irony was almost too much to bear. He decided to play along. "Well, Mr. Bruno," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips, "I suppose I do have a commitment to fulfill." As Bruno escorted Arthur back through the grand doors, the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Gone was the smooth flow of elegant guests. Now, all eyes were riveted on them. The murmuring crowd parted to create a path, their faces a mixture of curiosity, speculation, and barely concealed amusement. Arthur felt a wave of bewilderment wash over him. He was no longer an unwanted intruder. He was now the center of attention, the subject of intense scrutiny. He could feel the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes boring into him, analyzing his every move, his every flaw. He tried to maintain his composure, but it was difficult. His suit felt rumpled, his tie felt crooked, and his shoes felt particularly scuffed. He was acutely aware of how out of place he looked, surrounded by so much wealth and elegance. Bruno, his face still flushed with embarrassment, led Arthur towards the stage, his grip on Arthur's arm surprisingly gentle. The silence in the ballroom was deafening, broken only by the soft click of Arthur's shoes on the marble floor. He felt like an actor in a bizarre play, unsure of his lines and uncertain of his role. What was Mr. Davenport planning? And how was he going to explain all of this? He braced himself for whatever was about to happen, his heart pounding in his chest. The world had turned upside down in a matter of minutes. As Arthur reached the stage, Mr. Davenport rushed forward, his face beaming with genuine warmth. He extended both hands, grasping Arthur's firmly. "Arthur, my dear friend," he exclaimed, his voice filled with relief, "I am so terribly sorry about this unfortunate incident. A regrettable misunderstanding, I assure you." He turned to address the crowd, his arms still around Arthur's shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen, please forgive the interruption. As you can see, we had a slight security breach, but all is well now. Our honored guest is here." He lowered his voice slightly, as if sharing a secret. "You see, Arthur here is a man of great humility. He prefers to stay out of the limelight, to work quietly behind the scenes. He specifically requested that we not make a fuss over him. But sometimes," he added with a wink, "protocol must be overridden by common sense." He squeezed Arthur's shoulder affectionately. "Arthur, thank you for understanding, and thank you for being here tonight." He then shot a pointed look at Bruno, who was still standing near the entrance, looking thoroughly chastised. "Everyone makes mistakes, Bruno. The important thing is that we learn from them." The crowd chuckled politely, the tension in the room beginning to dissipate. Mr. Davenport's charm was working its magic. Mr. Davenport paused, allowing the polite applause to fade slightly. He took a step closer to Arthur, his voice dropping to a more intimate level. "But there is something you all should know about Arthur," he continued, his eyes twinkling mischievously. "Something he would never tell you himself." He turned to face the audience, his expression suddenly serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's gala, this magnificent event, would not have been possible without the extraordinary generosity of one individual. An individual who prefers to remain anonymous. Until now." He paused for dramatic effect, his gaze sweeping across the room. "It is my distinct honor to reveal that Arthur Penhaligon is the anonymous benefactor who funded this entire charity gala." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Murmurs of disbelief and astonishment filled the air. Mr. Davenport raised his hand to quiet them. "Furthermore," he continued, his voice ringing with sincerity, "Arthur's contributions to our charity over the years have been nothing short of transformative. He has quietly and selflessly supported countless initiatives, changing the lives of so many in our community. He is, without a doubt, one of the most generous and compassionate individuals I have ever had the privilege of knowing. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of Arthur shifting uncomfortably beside him. The silence shattered. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause, a wave of sound that washed over Arthur, almost knocking him off his feet. He was no longer the disheveled outsider, the unwanted intruder. He was now the hero of the hour, the man who had made it all possible. The guests rose to their feet, their faces alight with admiration and gratitude. They cheered, they whistled, they clapped their hands raw. They saw Arthur in a completely different light now. His rumpled suit, his crooked tie, his scuffed shoes, they no longer mattered. What mattered was his generosity, his compassion, his unwavering commitment to the cause. Across the room, Bruno and the other security guards stood frozen, their faces a study in mortification. The color had drained from their cheeks, leaving them pale and shaken. They had not only made a terrible mistake, but they had also humiliated the very man who had made their evening possible. They knew their careers were likely hanging by a thread. Even Mrs. Abernathy, the queen of gossip, looked stunned into silence, her eyes wide with disbelief. The tables had turned completely. Arthur, the unconventional gentleman she had dismissed so readily, was now the most important person in the room. The irony was delicious. The world, Arthur realized, was a very strange and unpredictable place. Arthur, completely overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of adoration, felt his cheeks flush. He was a private man, not used to such public displays of affection. He stammered slightly, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Thank you," he began, his voice a little shaky. "Thank you all for your kindness." He paused, searching for the right words. He hadn't prepared a speech. He never prepared speeches. He looked out at the sea of faces, each one filled with genuine admiration. He realized that he had an opportunity, a chance to share his beliefs, to inspire others to give back. He took a deep breath and continued, his voice gaining strength. I don't do this for the recognition," he said, gesturing around the opulent ballroom. "I do it because I believe it's the right thing to do. We all have a responsibility to help those less fortunate than ourselves, to give back to the community that has given us so much." He spoke from the heart, his words simple but sincere. He talked about the importance of education, the need for health care, and the power of compassion. He shared stories of the people he had helped, the lives he had touched. He spoke of the joy he found in making a difference, however small. "It doesn't take much to make a difference," he concluded, his voice filled with emotion. "A little kindness, a little generosity, a little bit of your time. It can all add up to something truly extraordinary. So please," he pleaded, "find a way to give back. Make a difference in the world. You won't regret it." He stepped back from the microphone, feeling strangely lighter, a sense of peace settling over him. He had said what he needed to say. The reactions to Arthur's revelation and his subsequent speech were varied and fascinating to observe. Many were genuinely impressed by his humility and his commitment to philanthropy. They approached him with sincere gratitude, eager to shake his hand and express their admiration. Some, however, were tinged with envy. They had spent years cultivating their image, donating publicly and attending every charity event, hoping to gain recognition and social standing. Yet here was Arthur, a man who had shunned the spotlight, receiving more praise and adulation than they had ever dreamed of. They couldn't help but feel a twinge of resentment. Others were simply surprised. They had judged Arthur based on his appearance, assuming he was just another gatecrasher. They were humbled by the revelation that appearances could be deceiving, that true wealth wasn't always measured in dollars and cents. Mrs. Abernathy, recovered from her initial shock, was now buzzing with excitement, eager to be seen near Arthur to claim some sort of acquaintance with the man of the hour. She cornered him with a practiced smile, showering him with compliments and faux concern. Even Bruno, still pale and shaken, managed to approach Arthur and offer a mumbled apology, his voice barely audible. Arthur, ever gracious, simply nodded and offered a kind smile, putting the security guard slightly at ease. Overall, the atmosphere in the ballroom had been transformed. Arthur's unexpected arrival and revelation had injected a sense of genuine purpose and meaning into the event, reminding everyone why they were really there. The rest of the gala was a completely different experience for Arthur. He was no longer the invisible man, the outsider struggling to fit in. He was now treated with the utmost respect and admiration. Guests lined up to speak with him, eager to learn more about his philanthropic endeavors. Waiters offered him the finest wines and delicacies, their voices deferential and polite. Mr. Davenport remained by his side for much of the evening, ensuring that Arthur was comfortable and well cared for. Even Bruno, now visibly relieved to still have a job, kept a watchful eye on Arthur, discreetly ensuring that he was not disturbed by overly zealous admirers. Arthur, though still somewhat uncomfortable with the attention, found himself enjoying the evening. He engaged in thoughtful conversations, sharing his ideas and learning from others. He discovered that many of the gala attendees were genuinely committed to making a difference in the world, and he found common ground with them, despite their vastly different backgrounds. He even managed a polite conversation with Mrs. Abernathy, who, despite her initial snobbery, proved to be a surprisingly well-informed and engaging conversationalist. He realized that first impressions could be deceiving and that everyone deserved a second chance. As the evening progressed, Arthur felt a sense of belonging that he had never experienced before. He was no longer just an anonymous donor. He was a valued member of the community, a respected leader, a true philanthropist. He had come to the gala feeling out of place and unwanted, but he was leaving feeling appreciated and fulfilled. As the gala began to wind down, Mr. Davenport led Arthur to a quiet corner of the ballroom, away from the throng of well-wishers. He offered Arthur a glass of sparkling water and settled into a comfortable armchair beside him. "Arthur," he began, his voice serious, "I owe you an enormous apology. I never should have let things escalate like that at the entrance. I should have trusted my instincts." Arthur waved his hand dismissively. "It's all right, Thomas. No harm done. Besides," he added with a wry smile, "it made for a rather interesting evening, wouldn't you say?" Thomas chuckled. "Indeed. But I also wanted to thank you, Arthur, for everything you've done for the charity over the years. Your generosity has been truly remarkable." Arthur shifted uncomfortably. "I don't do it for the thanks, Thomas. You know that. I just want to help." I know, Thomas replied, "but I still don't understand why you insist on remaining anonymous. You deserve the recognition, Arthur. You've earned it." Arthur sighed. "It's simple, Thomas. I don't want the attention. I don't need the accolades. I just want to make a difference. And I can do that more effectively if people don't know who I am. It's easier to stay focused on the work when you're not constantly being bombarded with requests and invitations." Thomas nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "I suppose I can appreciate that. But promise me, Arthur, that you'll at least let me acknowledge your contributions in a more private setting. A small dinner, perhaps, with just a few close friends." Arthur smiled. "We'll see, Thomas. We'll see." He paused, then added, "Besides, after tonight, I doubt anonymity is an option anymore." As the clock struck midnight, the gala drew to a close. Guests began to depart, their elegant gowns and tailored suits shimmering under the soft lights one last time. Limousines lined up outside, ready to whisk them away to their luxurious homes. Arthur, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction, said goodbye to Mr. Davenport. "Thank you, Thomas," he said sincerely, "for everything." Thomas smiled warmly. "The pleasure was all mine, Arthur. And please, promise me you won't wait so long to come to one of these events again." Arthur simply smiled non-committally. He wasn't sure he was cut out for the gala circuit. As he walked out of the crystal ballroom and into the cool night air, he couldn't help but reflect on the events of the evening. He had been humiliated, rejected, and then celebrated, all in the space of a few hours. He had been thrust into the spotlight, forced to reveal a secret he had guarded for so long. He felt a little uncomfortable with the newfound attention, a little overwhelmed by the adulation. He was, at heart, a private man, content to work quietly behind the scenes. But he also felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that his contributions had made a real difference in the lives of so many people. Despite the initial embarrassment and the subsequent discomfort, he was ultimately glad he had come to the gala. He had honored his commitment, shared his beliefs, and perhaps even inspired others to give back. And that, he realized, was all that really mattered. He hailed a taxi and headed home, leaving the glittering world of the Crystal Ballroom behind him. He knew that things would never quite be the same, but he was ready for whatever the future held. He was, after all, Arthur Penhaligon, the anonymous benefactor who had finally stepped into the light.